Otherwise, I could carry the mic around and follow you.
Or Herb will come down and threaten you.
It just comes right out of there.
Are we live on this thing?
We're going to
Matter
be
of seconds, yeah.
in about 2 seconds.
Live or
Can you
videotape?
turn off your own mic or?
Yeah, you just,
Live,
Oh, both, huh?
both.
Herb will come down and, okay. Big crowd. Good evening. Welcome to the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education Special Meeting, June 6, 2013. Christine, can we have a roll call, please?
Charlotte. Here. Gottschall.
Here.
Letchinger, here. Barry.
Present.
Marzern. Here. Ritter.
Present.
Ryder, I'm sorry. Haig.
Here.
All present.
All present accounted for. Quorum, good. First thing on our agenda is to request public comment. Is there anybody here who would like to address the board?
There.
Does not appear to be. So we'll move on to item 2, which is our discussion. And we're going to do a couple things tonight. We're going to start with a presentation from the ECRA group and focusing primarily on phase 3 of our strategic plan. And then after that, we'll get into some other discussions of phase 2 and where we want to go. So it's your mic.
Great, thanks.
John
Great.
Gatta from the ECRA group.
So I do have some handouts. I didn't know if people would have printouts here. So and there's a few different things in here that we'll reference. There's some sample documents, but there's also
Here,
a
if you
couple
give-
of different proposals that have been presented
You guys see
along the way as well as we talk about options for moving to phase 3.
And if John, if Kevin could have one also, since Kevin will be on our team as of July 1st.
Okay, what I thought I would do is just recap. I don't intend for this to be a didactic sort of lecture or presentation by any means, but I thought I would ski around a little bit, and depending on where our conversations go, I can reference certain images or certain frameworks on here that I think should facilitate the conversation. I wanted to start just doing a quick reminder. I know Gina was here last time, gave you an update on the process of where we are in phase 3. I'm not going to spend time on that, but I do want to just, again, reframe that all of this is built on an organizational model. Right? All this is built on making sure that there's a direction set at the large, in the large sense, and then as we operationalize and move down, at some point it comes to how do you turn all this into action. If you look at most organizational research, and certainly in our experience working with school districts, is organizations rarely fail in strategy. They often fail in execution. And school systems are certainly a part of that. And so one of the things that we've learned after doing this process over and over and over again, in multiple facets, big school systems, small school systems, and everything in between, it's rarely the strategy that doesn't work. It's the lack of commitment to execution. And so long as you're aligned in a best practice way, so long as you're focused, if you execute, you'll be successful. If you don't execute, you won't. And so really phase 3 is about executing, and it's about how do we make sure that we take the goals and objectives that are presented in the strategic plan and ensure that they actually get implemented. Because one thing we know for sure is, regardless of how brilliant the strategy is, if it never gets implemented, nothing gets done. And so from that perspective, I think it is really important to talk about how you move from the strategic plan, which is the broad direction, to the implementation plan, which is really the nuts and bolts of how you're going to get it done. And so if you have any questions, stop me again. I thought I would just start with a simple example and framework, and I think this can serve as a basis for discussion as far as how this would look moving forward. In your packet, I even provided some sample agendas of what an agenda for meetings would look like in phase 3. I presented another example as far as how goals and objectives turned into tactics and indicators. And then what I also wanted to do is, once we have a conversation around tactics as far as how you get this done from an action perspective, then really talk about how do you measure it. Because so much of phase 3 is about an analytic framework that lets everybody within the organization have information they need within their responsibilities to judge whether or not things are being implemented or not. At the Board of Education level, you're going to need a set of indicators that you can govern through. Right? You're going to need a set of indicators that reflect the desired position of the school district, that reflect the strategic plan, but at a level of grain that's appropriate for the Board of Education. But you can take that analytic framework and layer it all the way down to individual kids so that you have a systemic and aligned framework that goes from goals and objectives in the strategic plan, big systemic indicators that talk about system improvement, and layer that all the way down to individual kids. And so that's what I'm going to talk about in the second piece of this. So let's talk a little bit about what it really means to engage in phase 3 and move from goals, objectives to tactics. And this is an example. This doesn't come from your plan, but I think you could readily see how this would play out. So you might have a strategic goal to provide a rigorous and equitable curriculum that focuses on the whole child and challenges all students. You have a goal that's a little bit different, but represents a similar kind of idea. And so that's the goal, right? That's the Uber idea. That's if all things are working, that's in a large sense what we're trying to accomplish. And then you might have an objective that's related to that, to identify and place students appropriately in challenging courses and interventions. But there's a big gap between this statement and what you're going to do to implement that, right? Because there's a whole process that has to take place. So what are the specific things that you're going to do, right, that relate to making sure that you accomplish this objective? And so when you think about this, identify and place students appropriately into challenging courses and intervention, that is an objective that deals with rigor. That's an objective that deals with having high expectations for kids. That's an objective that deals with information infrastructure, as opposed to making sure that we have appropriate information to make those decisions. Right? So what are some plausible ways that you might consider getting that done? One plausible way is you might establish new cut scores for RTI. Right?
And I'm going to just jump in on that because we still are learning as a board. Some of you, I know that this week when Kevin and Ann presented, you heard a little bit about response to intervention. But basically what that is it's looking at scores of children and then determining the kids that are not meeting the goals, what kind of intervention are we going to give those kids to get them to the goal that we are moving for? What is the child's response to the intervention? That's what that's for. And so when you look at RTI, or response to intervention, you can set it up for students that are extremely low and getting them to meeting standards. You can also look at cut scores and establish cut scores for higher level students. So RTI stands for response to intervention. And that's a big educational jargon term. And I'm trying to be conscious of not throwing educational jargon to the board. So I thought I'd jump in with that.
Thank you.
And please, I admittedly make some assumptions along the way as well that I probably shouldn't. So
I do it a lot, and so that's one of my goals is really start looking at what's jargon, because I think it's easy to get lost in the educational jargon
So we
world.
need a jargon flag, like a big red flag.
Yeah. Don't hesitate to wave your hand.
But in a larger sense, this is really important, this kind of idea. Why? Because it sets the standards for the district. When you set up a response to intervention framework, what you're doing is you are imposing a definition of what it means to be on track academically. And that will vary community by community. I can assure you that the standards that Lake Bluff puts in place probably are not going to be consistent with standards that other districts put in place, because one thing that's very clear that came out of your strategic plan is high expectations and rigor matter here. And so how do you ensure that that philosophy is reflected in the very way you make decisions about kids and the benchmarks you set for kids? That's what this is about. So how do you do that?
When you're at the tactics phase and you have a committee together brainstorming tactics, or maybe the step before they start brainstorming, how do you ensure that you have people, in this specific example, but it would apply to any particular objective, how do you ensure that you have people at the table in that committee with the skill set and background to know that things like RTI even exist?
Well,
Like,
that's...
If it was just a committee of a bunch of us sitting around thinking of what do we do to make sure that this happens, we may not come up with that.
But I think you hit on the important piece. When you move to the implementation phase, it's got to be driven primarily by the administration. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to involve community members where there's that piece of expertise that's required. But if the strategic plan reflects the consensus of the community and reflects the direction of the board, then the governance function of making sure that when the plan gets handed down to the administration, that they are assembling the teams with the right expertise. And you're absolutely right. You have to assemble teams that are going to work on the implementation that have the necessary expertise. Some goals lend themselves very well to getting community involved, and if there's certain expertise that's needed. Others probably don't. And so those are the kind of decisions that the administration is going to have to make as they assemble the teams, but certainly the board is going to be abreast of all of that as the process moves forward, because as your governance function, it's ultimately the board that's responsible for making sure that the direction of the school district is consistent with the plan set forth by the community.
So you see it as the administration's responsibility to make sure that the right skill sets are in each of those committees?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I see it as definitely the administration's responsibility to drive phase 3.
Based with your feedback,
Yeah.
of course.
But that's not to say that you're not getting continually updated and,
Oh, yeah.
and abreast of everything.
I was just worried that if there's a bunch of people sitting around not knowing what they're talking about,
No.
trying to make some
No,
decisions.
absolutely not.
This is a similar question, but with that particular example you gave, I've been in a lot of situations where teams had to come up with goals, and one of the things they try to do is make the goals very manageable and very achievable, because it can be, intimidating to put the bar up higher. So with a goal like that, where, I'm a social worker, I don't have a background in education to know where that bar ought to be. So how does a board work with that to know that the teams are setting the goal up here
High
and
enough?
not?
High enough, like reaching high
Yeah.
enough?
Two ways. One is you rely a whole lot on the administration.
Mm-hmm.
Two, that's a large part of our value proposition, is to, we're a research firm. I mean, this is what we do for a living.
Okay.
How you set benchmarks, the methodologies you use to set benchmarks, whether your benchmarks are consistent with other districts that look like you. We can be incredibly helpful in those conversations as you talk about what indicators are appropriate and what are meaningful benchmarks to attach to those.
So a frame of reference
Okay.
as well, like compared to if our RTI scores are in the same level as our benchmark, or our bar is as high as Winnetka or Wilmette or whatever.
I mean, we can help you.
And districts outside the state. See, that's another thing that I like, is we can start looking on a little bit.
Montgomery County.
We could start looking at districts that are outside of the state, and we need to be doing
No.
things like that.
Well, and we
Washington,
should,
D.C.
yeah, because Illinois has set the bar lower than the rest of the country for a long time, so it's time for us to not only compare ourselves with Illinois, I would say.
But the ultimate accountability for setting these goals at a level that's going to be a reach, let's say, is with the superintendent, correct?
So there's,
I mean, I would assume there's one accountable party here. The board can chip in, we can look at these things, we can raise questions, but ultimately, she, in this case, is driving the program forward to meet the targets that are required.
absolutely.
And then you monitor every report that we get, which we'll be putting on that board planning calendar.
But the idea here is you're going to set up an analytical framework that goes all the way from the vision and goals of the plan, which at that level reflect if the plan is working, if the summative impact of all of the processes, programs we put in place, if all of that's working, what are the set of indicators that we should see favorable movement on? Indicators that reflect who we are, who we want to be, and that all of these changes should be impacting. But really, yeah, it's the administration that has to be responsible for the implementation of all of the goals and objectives. And it's only if you have implementation of those that you can judge whether or not the right strategy, existed or not. Because if you don't implement well, you never know, was it the strategy or was it inconsistent implementation? That's a question you're never going to untangle.
And each target, and I think more in corporate terms, but each target will have a team member, let's say, who is accountable for that particular item on their list. ultimately the superintendent's accountable, but each objective will have a team there, because typically in meetings, you get all kinds of concepts and ideas floating around. Someone has to be in charge, so I assume there's gonna be a team leader.
But I think it's an important, what I think is an important distinction, though, is you will set systemic indicators in the form of a scorecard, balanced scorecard, dashboard, pick your vernacular. But you're gonna have a set of big global indicators, strategic indicators that reflect if everything's working, the whole system's accountable for those, right? That's the set that really the Board of Education is gonna govern on. Then there's a set of execution metrics. Those are the ones that people own individually. That's where we talk about, we said we were going to establish new cut scores for RTI. And sometimes that's as simple as did we do it or not, right? And so sometimes an execution metric is just the creation of a document, the dissemination of new standards for RTI, check did we do it or not, and who's responsible for it. But phase 3 will work through each and every objective as we start to move to assign tactics to each one of those. You got to assign the ultimate person that's going to be accountable for that and the metric we're going to use.
Right.
But these metrics tend to be a little bit different than the other metrics because they're more formative, they're more process-oriented, and they're more around did we implement what we said we were going to implement, and they're less about what impact did they have.
And so when you say that, and I don't know if I'm going to form my question correctly here, when you talked about the board having the more general, talk to what you said to John. Say that again about the board being more concerned about.
The board, phase 3, in addition to assigning the tactics and the execution metrics, is also going to deal with a bigger set of metrics.
That's what I was referring to.
Those systemic metrics, those big quality indicators that define your quality, but really define the vision. They operationalize the vision.
Can you give us an example?
So usually these indicators, and I think if Gina last time, I think she launched an example one for you, didn't she, while she was here? But normally they're organized around the goals in the strategic plan, right? Because if the strategic plan reflects the desired position of the school district, then picking the goals in the strategic plan is a great way to start organizing a dashboard. And so normally you'll have something around student achievement. You have a goal that deals with making sure that students grow at their full potential in student achievement. So you'll have a variety of indicators around how do we define student achievement. Now for Lake Bluff, that's going to look a little bit different than other school districts because you have a broader definition of achievement here. So you're going to certainly have indicators in math and reading of where our students are, the rates of growth of students in math and reading. But for Lake Bluff, you may have additional indicators that deal with social and emotional.
Yeah,
you may have additional
definitely.
indicators that deal with other kinds of experiences, the arts. You have a broader definition, so your metrics have to reflect that definition. But at the end of the day, you will have a set of indicators for student achievement. You have a communication goal. You'll have a set of indicators that deal with how well you're doing that. One common way that that's done is you continue to administer annual surveys to key stakeholder populations, and you track that on a dashboard. You track questions like the perception of the community around fiscal responsibility. You ask that every year, and you track that, right? And you ask questions about parent involvement, and you administer that every year, and you track that. And that's where you begin to paint a picture of the school district and whether or not it's moving in a favorable direction or in the direction that you want. And then, in addition to identifying those metrics and putting the data processes in place to collect them, then it's the conversation around how do we set standards on those, or benchmarks that we call them, as to where do we want to be on these.
And where we want to be, that comes from the board.
Absolutely.
That's what I was trying, because having gone through the Baldridge, the board is the one that said, this is where we want to be. I don't care what journey you go on to get there, but this is where we want to be.
I mean, setting the standard for the district is definitely the work of the board. And the central
This
office
is when
administration.
we need the data from you,
Well, this is where we could be a big help.
right?
This is where we could be a
They
big
help us with the data. We collect a lot of it.
No, what I mean is that if we're setting up some benchmark data as far as,
And they
academic
can help us with that,
achievement,
yes.
I'm a little foggy with, student well-being because I have no idea how to measure this, but.
We're all struggling with that a little, but yes, this is where we can rely on
alright.
them for,
Okay.
there's a great district in this state that we can use as a benchmark for this.
And we have benchmark models that we've built. There's a lot of resources we can bring to bear to help you, work through where to set those.
And that's a difference from a lot of the companies that help with strategic planning and education. That's something then that I don't have to go out and hit every resource I've got to say, gee, where's the best district that measures social emotional, and how do you do that?
Yeah, no, they do.
And some indicators are what we call cheap in the sense that they're easy to acquire. Some indicators are really expensive in the sense of the activities that are required just to get the number. Right? And so, as you do build your dashboard and you build your scorecard, those are considerations as well, because the last thing you want to do is put a scorecard or a dashboard together because it's important and then not commit to what it takes to get the data updated. That's something that you don't want to do.
Jargon flag. I wonder, I think I have my head wrapped around it, but does everybody understand what we're talking about, a dashboard? Is that clear to everybody?
Yes, well, I'm looking at the example that Gina pointed us to before. But there's a dashboard, I think, that, like this one, and then there are reports, right? And I guess what I'm trying to understand is really what's the difference between a dashboard where you click on some goal and you get, options like you do here for what kinds of tactics under which goal you wanted to look at, and you could drive down to the particular tactic you're interested in. That's kind of fancy and presumably expensive. And then there's this is how you compare. Here's your report. Those have to be, ultimately they say the same thing, but in two very different ways. And one is this one, very easy to update, very easy to understand, very easy for the public to look at. And another is, PDFs on some website somewhere or in a hand, right? So are both of those called dashboards, or just the fancy one that I'm looking at right here is a dashboard, and the others are just called reports?
Yeah, at some point it's semantics. Dashboard. I think the evolution of the language around dashboard is more of a visual, live kind of a framework that is updated, and so it has this idea of you're driving a car, and yes, there's a lot of things going on over there good, but at the end of the day, I just got to know how fast am I going, am I overheating, and what are my RPMs? That's really all I need to know whether or not,
How the district, how is the district being driven? What
But
are my, what is
dashboards-
my?
But what you're saying is that the dashboard is probably not granular enough for thorough analysis by the board, correct?
Pardon me?
The dashboard is probably not granular enough for, a good it may sort of highlight an area of problem, but it doesn't.
It may or may not be.
Who's the intended audience of a
What's that?
dashboard?
That's a good question, right?
So
That seems to me that it's a community audience, but you tell me.
the framework exists at various levels of grain. What you're looking at is the highest level of grain, really just a reflection of the vision and the goals with a set of indicators that really should be transparently communicated to the community because they define who you are and what's important to you, right? And so that's a public. When we say public, it's public because it's totally publicly available to anybody, right? Now, in working with you, there are indicators that this is what we do with districts is there are indicators that you may want to track, you just don't want them publicly available, right? And so you would log into a portal and you would be authenticated before you could see a set of indicators that are, that are lower.
So you guys may see them, but the public may not.
Well, it's, or you make everything available to everybody. It's just, that's one of those,
Like you might show whether the fifth grade is achieving in math, but you might not show that particular classrooms are performing or underperforming.
yeah, usually it's not common practice to make publicly available things that link into evaluations and
Right.
Yeah.
personnel and all
And
kinds of
certainly
But
at
you
the
might.
student level, you
Right.
wouldn't make it public,
In the
although,
state.
And at the
Yeah.
student level, because this goes all the way down to the individual kid, which that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about, how you layer this framework all the way down, so you even have a snapshot of a kid.
John, I'm trying to get my head around between the execution and when we really get some meaningful data that we can use. I don't understand what kind of a lag time you're looking at there.
It depends on what you're collecting.
Yeah, and it depends on, I mean, the nature of,
I mean, I see us collecting all that stuff, but I'm not, you know, or we've got plans to put it into place, and then we execute it, and then how long does it take before we get some data back that is, you know, it's enough data that it's significant, that you can start getting some analysis out of it.
Fine tuning and using it?
In a school district, we have different data coming in at different months all year long. Some of it we only get once a year, and then you build trend data for that, just like the results of our MAP test that I went through. It's meaningful for this year. We won't have a comparison for 2 more years because they're different tests. And the same with ECRA when they set up our indicators. Some things, for instance, we may measure satisfaction with our communication next year a couple different times. Or you may decide that we just want to ask it at the end of every year. How were your emails? How were your Twitters? So,
I'm just trying to get a general idea of how long it takes before you get something really meaningful.
well, and I think, again, it speaks to, you know, the level of grain. When you talk about the system, the school system, those big strategic indicators, right? Things don't cycle that fast at the strategic level, right? I mean, and even in any outside of education, the big bets, the big strategic decisions, right? You're not evaluating the impact of those at as short of a cycle as you are, you know, all of the implementation details. So some of your big indicators that we're calling the dashboard or a scorecard, I think a lot of those indicators are going to come online once or twice a year. And that's the time frame of how you're going to cycle with that. However, when you move inside the school system and you start monitoring progress of each and every kid and you start looking at whether or not people are implementing activities, those are much more alive because the iterations of the data are faster. You know, you can only report as fast as there are iterations of data. And so if there's no iterations of data, you can't really update.
So one thing that you could get very quickly, I would think, is you could look at for example, I'm just looking at theirs, fund balance, and you could say, we know what our fund balance is, and pulling from state available data, we can look at everyone else's fund balances, and maybe we're not comparing exact apples and apples, but we have, that data is rapidly available. On the other hand, MAP data depends on the cycle of the curriculum. So I think the answer to the question is how quickly you could get meaningful data. It sort of depends on what data you're trying to assess. And it seems to me that what we're proposing is that we're going to be assessing a wide variety of data.
Sure.
I'm looking at a wide variety of indicators, some of which could be immediately available tomorrow if we did our research, and others of which will be a course of months, if not years, before
Sure.
it will be available.
What am I concerned, I mean, I've seen this in strategic plan, is that you get, I mean, you know, just because you weigh the pig doesn't mean that the pig grows fatter. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you're data-oriented, but not action-oriented. I think that, you know, what I would like to see in the strategic plan is, you know, set up some benchmark, but in the meantime, based on your feedback, you know, what needs to be done to just, even in the absence of data, make things better? I mean, what is it that, you know, that we are not, where our processes are not particularly good, or, you know, they lack. And the second thing too is that I'd like to have some, I would like to narrow the priorities, because I think that if you chase too many,
That's a good
whatever,
point.
rabbits or whatever you're supposed to chase, we're gonna get nothing. So I think it would be really good as a group that we just say, okay, this is like a number one, fire alarm type priority. We have to put our heads around this, and then, you know, and then there's number 52 down the road.
but sometimes you can have a schedule for when you get to 52
Right.
also.
I mean, the way to prioritize is through the timelines that are set in phase 3. Because I don't think that if you looked at the 4 goals that are in your strategic plan, I don't think any of you would say, well, let's just not worry about that goal. It's too important. I mean, you have 4 big goals in your strategic plan, and I don't think at that level you're gonna dismiss any one of them. Now, you have objectives under each one of
No,
them.
but
Now,
once
you
get
may
to the objective,
choose,
this is when you're gonna
right,
have to.
you may
start
choose to
with-
prioritize the implementation of certain objectives within certain goals to make sure that it's manageable and you can channel resources effectively.
So John, here's my question, because I think it's gonna answer their question. So we start with phase 3 and we're putting our teams together and we have mixed teams. And I say, well, enhance the current gifted program offerings. We'll take that one. And I say that's the highest priority. And so we work based upon this and then we bring it back to the board and the board says, no, we think the set and monitor growth projections is more important. How do I as administrator and the board work together to not duplicate, I don't want to waste our time. How do we prioritize with that? What would that look like? So I can hear from the board what their priorities are too.
Our recommendation for the most efficient way to do that is, again, the board setting the direction of what we want to accomplish. That's the goals and the objectives, right? And really the goals, but, enough progress on the objectives such that everyone's clear of what that goal represents, right? So you've set the direction of the school district at that point. This is what's important to us, right? Now it's charged to the administration to get that done. Now, given the obvious constraints that exist within school systems, the administration is going to have to make some tough choices as to how do we get it done within the resources we have available to us. And some of those choices are going to be to prioritize certain objectives before others. But I would strongly recommend that work be driven by the administration and then reported back to the board, because I think it's a much more efficient process, and it keeps the board on the governance function, and it keeps the administration on the operating function. And so long as you're staying true to what's represented in the plan,
I'll get it.
then then I think the administration is going to be in the best position to make those decisions, because they have a better idea as to the resources that are within the buildings, the resources that are at the district office, the kind of expertise that can be tapped in order to implement certain objectives, and they could probably make more insightful choices.
So I think now I can phrase my question, because I think this is where, and I'm just gonna jump right in, this gets into the phase 2 and phase 1 also. I think that the board has set the goal, the guiding principles and all that, but this is a conversation this board hasn't kind of talked through, just so I can hear some of their thoughts.
Sure.
So I think that what would need to happen is really, the first step in phase 3 would be going back and reviewing phase 2 as far as this board's, not necessarily changing wording, but so that I hear from them and the administrators hear from them where their priorities are. I think that would help me, because we have 4 new members and I need to hear from them where their priorities lie. That doesn't necessarily change the plan, because you even stated the 4 goals are going to be the 4 goals. They're very important, all 4 of them, for a school district. But I think really helping better define from them. Am I saying what I think all of you guys are feeling?
Yes.
Well, I would state it perhaps a bit more broadly. I don't want to close the door. I think it's an appropriate conversation to have about changing some of the wording and maybe refining some of the goals. I know this is going to strike fear in the hearts of many. Just even making sure that we all still share the same mission vision statement, that we think there's enough specificity that reflects the philosophy of the current board, that it provides the framework and the foundation for us to move forward. So I don't want to shut the door on having a more fulsome conversation about all of it, which is not to say that we need to necessarily revisit all of it, but maybe we do. I think that's the first conversation we need to have at some point in this process. I don't know if my fellow board members agree with me or not. If I'm the only one that's out there saying that, then it may be a shorter conversation, but.
I want to respond to it a little bit to say, because I can understand new board members coming on, and now you assume some ownership and responsibility for this process, which you haven't participated up till now. So I can understand wanting to have input in the first part of it. And at the same time, I see that the way we came to what we have was by gathering information and data from a lot of different sources in a way that I don't think we can go back and redo. So I'm not sure how it would, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Maybe
it
it's
was
just
all the
more of an
focus groups,
explanation
all
as
the
to how you
interviews.
arrived at them.
I'm sorry?
Maybe it's just more of an explanation.
Well, I think,
How we got to.
I think there's an opportunity here to take advantage of the new board member's perspective on what you've already done in a positive way. We're not saying, you know, that necessarily we're going to change anything. But I think it's important that we have an opportunity to take a look at what you've done. We have, I know Julie has. And I think the additions that at least Julie's brought to the table, and myself as well, are worth looking at, are worth taking some time with. Because this is we have one opportunity to get this right.
Well, that's right, and as I look at the color-coded up and down arrows you had there, what's squarely in our mission is to make sure that the vision and the mission statement and the strategic goals are the right ones.
Right.
The rest of it is a hybrid, and it's very important. There will be prioritization, but the administration will take the lead on that. What is this, you know, the board's responsibility is to make sure that's really right. So I think with 4 new board members, it's an appropriate conversation to have.
But what we have was distilled not from us.
No, I know that. I
From
watched
people in the
all
community.
of it. I've read all
Okay.
of it.
'Cause-
And I'm not even talking about necessarily, it won't necessarily be 4 new goals, like a whole new direction. But I want this work product to, you know, be the best that it can be. And I think that it's at least worth a conversation about refining. One of the things that concerns me, just to be a little bit more specific, is that, you know, the strategic goals, some of them are very broad. And maybe we'll decide that that's appropriate, but I think a little more specificity, something a little bit more refined would be better. If you're going to convene committees to do all of this, I think we need to be very clear, do what we can to minimize overlap between the goals, just so that when we send people off to do things, particularly community members and everybody that may be involved in this, we've sent a pretty clear message. So, you know, I think it's at least worth a conversation.
I mean, to Julie's point, I'm looking at the mission statement, and I would instinctively reorganize the points in the mission statement. It says lifelong learner as a first goal. And that's the old one?
That's the old one. The new one is to provide a
Wait,
premier
so-
educational foundation that enables each student to thrive. I watched the process of how that came about. And I looked carefully at the original one, which was very long. When I read those words, to me, it doesn't necessarily capture public education and the purpose of public education. Now, I've come up with a suggestion just so I can give you an apples-to-apples comparison of the kind of thing I'm thinking. What I think is a good alternative would be something like...
Is it the right time to be getting into this level of detail right now? I would love to see, give John the opportunity to get through his conversation so that we can dive back into this, just to keep it focused and to let John get through it and then get through his phase 3 section, and then we can address the kind of the big picture.
Okay, that's fine. I wasn't sure where we were in the
I
discussion.
would just add a
That's my
couple of
opinion.
points of, I mean, in listening to this though, just a few things to think about. If we're talking about, you know, revising some subtleties of language and just capturing the essence of what's represented in the plan a little more succinctly or eloquently, I mean, you can build that into phase 3, and you can charge the administration through the input that you give the administration to, as part of phase 3, to revise the mission statement or revise the vision statement. If it's along the lines of language that more, you know, appropriately represents what's in the plan. Right? If you're looking at the plan though as it needs to start over, then you really got to ask yourself, I think, an important question, because the way the plan was done, if you believe that we're good at what we do, and you believe that we went through a disciplined process, then the statements of findings that are in that plan aren't going to change. I mean, you can go back and collect all the data you want. You're going to come up with the same findings. And so from that perspective, it becomes the interpretation of those findings, you know, as it relates to the direction of the school district. And so, again, is it an issue of language which certainly could be built into phase 3? Or is it an issue of a change in direction, which is going back to a little bit, not to phase 1, because again, the statement of findings are the statement of findings. Those, I think, are as compelling as ever. But one of the things that is pretty compelling in Lake Bluff is your storyline's pretty clear. And so I don't think, even if you revisit it, you're talking about a radical shift in direction, if you want to stay aligned to the broader consensus. Now, I think there's always opportunities to get buy-in around language and things that more adequately reflect, maybe some prioritization, but all of that can be done in phase 3. I mean, that's phase 3 stuff. But you do have to go into phase 3 with consensus on these are the goals. At least as they represent what they're supposed to represent. You can still toy around with some wording, but the big ideas are there.
Well, talk to me, how does phase 3 unfold then, very specifically? Like, I know we have a number of objectives written down. Would part of phase 3 be to refine those?
Yeah, the first
Objectives?
thing they're going to do is finalize
Okay.
the language and the that's the number one, the first thing that's going to be done is you're going to finalize the language for the goals and objectives, at least for the sake of planning and for, the first year of implementation. But strategic planning is an organic process, so it's never going to just stop. I get a little concerned when you hear language, you get one, we got to get this right, we only have one time to get it right, it's never going to change. Strategic planning in its definition is organic, it's going to be changing all the time. Now, it shouldn't be radically changing, but as the environment changes and your priorities change and it's not reasonable to suggest that there might be ongoing small edits to the plan.
When we voted on strategic plan, we voted on mission, vision, goals. We didn't vote on objectives. The
Right.
objectives we came up with were
Just a start.
a start. It was kind of a brain dump. I remember using that word. It was, let's get all the ideas we can out there, especially hitting on the key points that we thought were important to get under each one. And with the idea that when we start forming committees, they massage, they collapse, they narrow them down, they prioritize and take what might be 12 or 15 goals, in some cases down to 4 or 5, big ones.
Objectives.
Yeah, objectives, sorry.
Because the objectives is define the goal. I mean, that's, you define the goal through the objectives.
Okay, so I heard you say you voted on mission, vision, goals. Is it the position that can or would be revisited in phase 3 or not revisited in phase 3?
I think we need to revisit it. Otherwise, we're
I think
ignoring the
we need
input
to.
of the new members.
I think it depends on your perspective of how we visit it. Me personally, I'm very concerned about the message we send to the community about all the work, turning our back on hours and hours of work that went into this process.
Look, can I make a comment? Let's revisit it and see what happens. I mean, I don't think we're going to turn our backs on any work that's already been done, but I think it's worth having a conversation. So let's take that step, and if
Yes,
it gets,
we get to
if
where
it gets
you
too
guys are.
involved and we get arguing, and it doesn't make any sense in the direction we're taking, we'll call a halt to it or we'll change our approach. But we don't know what we're going to do until we talk about it.
That's true.
I'm sort of two minds of it. While there's a real desire, I think, on all of our parts to have the best document that we can have, I'm also well aware that you can edit and edit and edit and edit. And really, time is the one thing that ends the editing. It's not because everybody's going to stand around and say, oh, this is perfect. There's
Well,
nothing
why
more
don't
we can
we
do to
get-
this. So I am
Let's have the
of two
conversation.
minds of that, about that. That said, I think that it's worth looking at and finding especially if there's low-hanging fruit, if there are things that we can immediately say, oh yeah, that makes it better. We ought to do that. I agree, but I do think we need to find some reasonable bounds to, so that we aren't regurgitating phase 2 over and over again until we get it perfect, because frankly, nothing is going to be
We're having a
perfect.
conversation about something that hasn't even existed. So let's have it exist, have the conversation, and then see where it takes us. We're talking about what ifs, ands, and buts about something that we haven't even
I don't
talked
see this
about.
taking too long.
I think
No, I can't, I don't either.
Yeah, I think Susan put it very well. I guess, and I think Mark raised a good point when he said, what's the agenda? Where are we here in the agenda tonight? So what do you think? I think we need to have the conversation. I don't know that we need to have it at this particular moment. So do we move forward with just finalizing your discussion on phase 3, and then maybe tonight, or maybe you're gonna propose a different time, we would take a step back and talk about where we are with mission, vision, goals?
I think it's really important when we talk about that John and probably Gina, since you've both been active with us, are there for that, because they can kind of help explain too. But I don't know if that's something all of you guys want to just talk through.
It's also a tough thing to organize in terms of just logistics, getting everybody's schedules, but why don't we let John proceed through, and we'll pick his brain on everything we can about phase 3. And if we are wrapping up at a reasonable hour, delve into that a little bit and see where it goes.
That sounds
Makes
good.
sense.
And my recommendation to the board, though, is, so that you continue, so the process continues to move, is to adopt some strategy for how you're gonna do phase 3, and just make this conversation part 1 of
The first
phase 3.
Part
The
one.
first step of phase 3. But you have to come to some consensus of here's how we're gonna do phase 3. There's a phase 3 whether you like it or not. Now, you can start that at certain, there's a different starting point, if you will, for where phase 3 starts. And given the conversations here at the board, it seems like that you want to at least have one opportunity to have a robust conversation around finalizing what those goals are. So let's make that step 1 of
Making it
phase 3.
their own, I think.
Let's make that phase 1 of step 3, but let's lay out a phase 3.
And having our eye on the end, because we're
Yes.
at 9 months in on this thing already, I think, right? I mean, we started in September, and, have an end goal in mind.
And from that perspective, I think it would, things will move a lot smoother if you make some decisions on whether ECHR is going to be involved in that. So we've given you some certain proposals of different ways to think about it, but I think you're going to have to put some timelines together. And I think, those timelines some of those conversations can start tonight as far as
So we can get started.
when you want to be done. I'm assuming that you want to be able to implement, and be in a position to start implementing new things next year. And so, if you want to do that, we got to put a timeline together. And if you think that we can help facilitate, then we have to formalize a relationship with us so that we can help you do that, and we can, whatever we're charged to do, we'll help you do. And it sounds like we need this.
What would be useful for me would be, why don't we get started with phase 3? I mean, let's get started. Instead of talking about doing the damn thing, let's start working on it. And as we're working on it, I think that, I think that the new guys will get probably a better sense of comfort from the job that was done before. And
And we can go back
and then we can
revisit.
move forward and, excuse me. We've been at this, you've got 9 months, give me a break. This is not that, you know what I'm saying? It should be done faster. Otherwise it gets stale. And so I'm for moving forward. So let's try to, start with phase 3 and start with objective number 1 and one of the sub-goals, and then see what we can do.
I think, Christine, you make a good point, because if we start
We'll have a better
refining
sense.
objectives, it may spell out better language for the goal as we
And
put
we
those
can go
objectives
back and
together.
revisit.
It may make it very clear as we're working through that.
And I need to hear from this board. So I would say go ahead and continue on with where you were in phase 3, and then we can make some final.
Well, I think, I could go into all kinds of detail here, right? But
Don't go into these details, go into our details. Can you do that?
Well, we need,
But
to-
I
I think
think-
we're deciding if we're gonna retain ECHR first.
I
for
think the
phase
most
3.
important thing to come out of tonight, I think if there's a goal for tonight, it's that the board make a decision for how it's going to get this work done.
My goal
And-
would be and recommendation will be to hire ECRA and move forward, and we can definitely, do whatever we need to do, because I need to hear the conversation that everybody has revolving phase 1 and phase 2 anyway.
But then, I can go back from tonight, and we can immediately start putting things into place, we can start putting timelines together, we can start putting agendas together, we can start driving this process for you.
And we could set the conversation date that you guys could
Right.
come out and go through.
And the first component of phase 3 is gonna be to revisit and have a conversation
Well,
around.
let's look at it from this point of view. When do we take action on the decision to hire Ecker or not?
June 18th.
What do we need to know before June 18th?
How much they cost?
Well, that's a good
You
one.
know,
But
the entire thing
but-
broken down by stage.
do we
and
have
see-
questions in addition to that, that would help everybody have a level of confidence in ECRA to vote for doing that?
Yeah, well, you know, I heard Jean's recommendation. I'd be interested in the position of the board members that have worked with ECRA before. I would imagine that we're gonna move forward with ECRA, unless somebody tells me there's a reason not to do that.
My opinion is to move forward with ECRA. I think there's too much lack of expertise on behalf of board members to try to
Yeah, no,
trudge through that alone.
Well, maybe what you can tell us then is what are we gonna get from you during phase 3? So we have a better expectation of what we're gonna be paying for,
Phase 3, you're gonna get,
in detail.
okay, in two main things, what you're gonna get out of phase 3 is active facilitation and project management of phase 3, which means we're going to put schedules of meetings together, and there's a sample of an agenda of what a meeting like that would look like. In this particular instance, we gotta do there's kind of like a initial stage of just working with the board. So the first, number one, we're gonna get a date on the calendar to come back and work with this group to have the conversation that was raised today about what are the goals and the objectives, so that we can have that conversation.
I might suggest we have that conversation tonight, or at least start it.
He needs to be compensated for that, I think.
Well,
No, I'm here, I'm happy.
He's here. I just don't know.
I'm
if we
here.
have-
Pitch.
yeah.
I'm here, I'm happy to do anything you want to tonight. I'm prepared to talk about anything.
I think, John, the biggest thing that our board heard, but it's been a year almost since they've heard it, is the difference. It's phase 3 without the dashboard and phase 3 with the dashboard. And then it talks about the above costs, what they don't include, but I think I'm gonna get back on John's question, all the things it does include. And I wanna highlight a couple things you've already said. Benchmarks across the nation, helping us facilitate meetings, getting all the players in one room and walking around and really helping make sure that the meetings are facilitated, getting the data together.
The growth models, right?
Take it over
We talked
there.
about that too.
So there's two different options you have for proceeding with us. And that's, I think, it's worth talking about. One is the original proposal that we gave you, way back when we did the strategic plan of phase 3 being $30,000 broken into 2 parts. Right? So that option is still out there. That proposal is still good. And what would be included in that proposal is, again, the project management of phase 3, but active facilitation of, in this particular case, it's gonna take an extra meeting, so probably 4 meetings of active facilitation and bringing out frameworks and bringing them back and getting everything organized and getting the data and getting the dashboard together and.
Those are substantial meetings, like full days
Yeah,
with
yeah,
committees.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Those are big, but those aren't necessarily the board. Again, this is where it passes to the administration. So the administration, it's easier to schedule with the administration than it is the board. The first meeting though has to be with the board because we have to, we got to get past that first.
So this is all do you keep track of your time during this process? For example, you're going to be involved in each team effort along the way? So you'll be coaching the teams as they move forward? Let's
So-
assume that goes twice as long as you expected. Do you come back and
So that's the difference between the 2 proposals that we gave you. The one is to get you organized to be ready to implement, right? But there's a definitive time that we peel off if you're just gonna contract us to do phase 3. There's another alternative, which instead of 30,000 is 35,000, but if you engage with us for 3 years, we're gonna be here for 3 years and not only get the implementation set up in the dashboard, but we're gonna do ongoing year-over-year data warehousing, data management, work with the administration on all the metrics, the growth model, the student pieces, everything. And all the coaching along the way.
And what's that cost?
5,000 additional.
So it's $35,000.
But that's a 3-year commitment.
Rather than 30,000 for a one-year commitment?
Yeah, other than 30,000 to do it, just get you, to get everything up and running, but then you gotta carry it from there.
Or
Or
35 each
35
of 3 years?
each year.
Yeah,
35.
35. But you have to understand, the services that are in there, you're talking about an entire data infrastructure. You're talking about a data warehouse, you're talking about an intelligence platform, you're talking about benchmarks, you're talking about
yeah,
student
but
growth
once you
models.
set it up,
You're talking about, yeah, but the amount of sophistication and analysis that goes into this is,
Well, if you don't do it, who does?
what's that?
If you don't do it, who does?
The district administration.
Here's your piece of paper, John. That's what we have.
No, John, I wanted to ask a question, though, because I know and I shared this with you, we did this with one of our vendors, I can't remember which one. What would happen if we signed on for a year for the full thing, so we could kind of see what it looks like, and then make a decision at the end of the 1 year, what we're gonna do for the future?
right. I think that's a good idea. And the problem I have with your proposal is that I would like for you to set up a system that, once implemented, we could monitor ourselves, internally, as opposed to having to go through you guys, to do data input and so on and so forth.
But, and I understand that, but what I think is overlooked is the amount of work that it takes to keep it up. You're not talking about software that just kind of we operate. I mean, how are you gonna update your benchmarks? Who's gonna do that every year? Who's gonna update all of the values that you need for your dashboard? Some of these are very complicated.
Can
Well,
you give some
it would be
examples?
pretty easy to take the MAP scores from one year to the next and look at one kid from one test to the next. But that's one measure, and probably like one of the cheap ones. That's low-lying fruit. That's easy to get. Some of the other things, I think ECRA brings expertise in. How do you measure that? What's a meaningful way to measure this?
I mean, some of this gets into
This is a
how,
conversation to have. I was hoping we would get into this stuff a lot.
and so, yeah, so I can, prepare
But
to
where does
talk-
it end?
But you
Does
see,
it-
I think there is difficulty, there's inherent problem in us not being able to do this in-house, because I think there's something good about manipulating the data and learning about the data and what's happening, you know what I'm saying? So to the extent that we farm it out, I'm comfortable with that. You're gonna have to give me something more to help me, wrap my hands around this.
I think,
let me give you
John, while you're looking for something, I do want to share that that's why maybe a year might be a good idea. In large districts have people dedicated only to this.
Right.
That's my concern.
Small districts do not.
Gene does not have the
And
hours in the day for this stuff.
It might, maybe you look at someone who comes in on a part-time basis. Lake Forest has someone that's dedicated solely to this for both their districts. We don't have that here, so I think at the minimum, I would look like, let's get the whole system in place, let's do the whole works next year, and then let's evaluate, because I will tell you, having been in a district that went through all these processes and kept all this data, in Palatine, we had actually 2 people that were dedicated. One did all the student data, and one did all the survey data. So we had 2 people solely, that was their job.
Should we have you finish what you were going to say,
No, I
and then
just wanna-
kind of circle back
I
to
just want to
this?
give you an idea as to what's required, the kind of resources you're going to have to somehow be able to bring to be able to do all of this. I mean, if you look at all of this, it's not just the strategic plan that you have, which that's got to all get organized, but then there's all of the emerging pieces that's going on at a state and national level that is legislated into law that you have to do, but you have to do it systemically, and you have to connect it in ways that's proactive. You have all the para-legislation, which is the Performance Evaluation Reform Act, which requires you by law to evaluate teachers with a significant component of student growth. So you have to link student growth and how students perform to teacher evaluation. That's not an easy thing to do.
We are just ready now to bring in the new evaluation plan, and that has nothing to do with student growth yet. That's just the new evaluation plan. That's aligned with
I
requirements.
guess what we're trying to wrap our hands around here, is this an ongoing engagement that we're going to become involved with? Or is it a
Absolutely.
1 or 2 year deal?
No, it's an
So we're
ongoing
talking
engagement.
about 30 or 35,000 for the next,
You're looking at that as a staff augmentation model. You're looking at it as, given all of the emerging mandates that are going out at the state level, all of the data and analytic needs that are required for the strategic plan, all of the information and transparency reporting that's needed. I think you have to do it all.
So you
In
said it's
some
30
degree, so the
grand a
point
year?
is, are you gonna build the capacity
Compared to a
internally?
full-time
Or
employee and
are you gonna,
benefits,
or are you gonna
might be a
fractionally
steal.
augment your staff through?
I'm just trying to clarify. It's not clear here what our, from my perspective, it wasn't clear here what we were getting into. So I'm not challenging the importance of what you're doing. I understand that. I just want to understand what's going to be required and what's our engagement process.
You would think of this as a long-term, and you'd have, this would be a line item in the budget that you would see every year. And that as a deliberate choice to partner for this expertise as opposed to try to build that capacity.
And hire somebody full-time like Lake Forest does, which would include benefits and a lot of other headaches.
No, I
Is
understand
Lake
that.
Forest in on the same program? as-
No.
With ECRA?
No, they have their own person doing
They
it,
have their
right?
own person doing it. But I think, John, what I sense from people, we have all different levels. We have the old board members that are very familiar with your work and they've seen some of your work. We have the new board members who really aren't familiar even, they still have concerns about our first phase. And so they haven't seen, they don't have the background knowledge to make the commitment, I think. And so we have those two things, and then we have me. And Kevin, I hope you're paying attention, because I look at all these things, it's taken me a year just to work with the teachers to get an evaluation plan, and I'm still trying to figure out who I'm gonna have to format it and type it up. So, yes, you've heard me correctly. So, we're a small district, and I think and one of the other options is to be looking at other small districts and combine, but other small districts around here are all in different stages with strategic planning and all these other items. So, that's why I keep saying maybe if we had one other option with an obligation of a year until they bring themselves on board, they see all the data collected, because I think our old board members were wowed with all the things that you have to offer, but the new board members don't have any of that basis yet.
Well, and part of that, for me, was in having your team come in and talk about kind of what your expertise is. Because you have a PhD, correct, in statistics, so that comes into play. But their staff involve a number of people who have a high level, in my opinion, a high level of education and experience in different areas, in different parts of this that make that work. So even if we said, well, we're gonna do it, we're gonna try and contract with Lake Forest, or we're gonna try and hire our own person, you don't get the diversity of skill that I was sold when they came in, that I really felt they had great diversity in their skills. And frankly, I think knowing that you have a consulting company that brings that, gives some credibility to the work that you're doing. I mean, you could spend a lot of money measuring stuff and never get anywhere, right? If you don't measure the right things, if they're not measured in the right way, if they're not reported
And
properly.
then don't use it.
Yeah, or don't use it. I mean, so,
So let me give you just a 10-minute overview of who we are and the breadth of what we do, because even what we're talking about here.
I don't think I need
Yeah, I don't
that.
think
I mean, I have confidence that the prior board selected a good outfit. What I want to know is, what are you going to do, and how much is it going to cost for how long?
Well, and let me refine that question or maybe build on it. But I understand the first year where you collect all this, you put the systems in place, you develop the evaluation system. What I'm curious about is why those things aren't more self-sustaining in years 2 and 3. So
Yeah.
we get you for a year, you put it all in place. I don't know how many of these things need to be measured on an annual basis. Let's say you get something that's not easily quantifiable, like wellness of students. So that's something where your expertise is very good, because how do you quantify that? But then do we need to do that every single year, or is it good enough to go every other year, every 3 years to take a look at that metric? So that's the question I have.
Well, there's a couple of pieces, I think, and I want to make sure that I hit on everybody's concerns. So let's just take phase 3 as a milestone, and let's draw a line in the sand as to, let's just complete the first iteration of phase 3, which means at that point we have a fully baked strategic plan, we have objectives, we have tactics, we have metrics, and the whole thing is set up, okay? The proposal that is in there for that $30,000 is gonna set you all up, okay? But then, without an ongoing engagement, then we peel off, okay?
And talk about what that will look like then.
So let's talk about what we would do if we just set you all up. We're gonna come in and facilitate a series of meetings. One is just gonna start here with the board level. Then we're gonna work with the administration to assemble the other teams that are gonna work on the other goal areas. We're gonna facilitate the meetings of each goal area and objectives to come up with tactics for each and every objective. And we're basically gonna, we're gonna fill in this, and you haven't, you have another example in your back. We're gonna fill in this kind of a framework for each and every objective. And so you have a detailed roadmap of who's doing what, who's responsible for implementing what objective, what's the timeline, and how are we gonna know if it's being implemented. Right? Along with that, we're gonna have conversations around what are the big strategic indicators and benchmarks that are gonna be used to judge progress at a large level. Right? That's the work that's gonna be done in phase 3. So if you want to just contract for that phase, there's absolutely, that's wonderful. We have no issue with that. But we gave you the alternative because part of what's going to come out of the implementation of this is ongoing needs for research, evaluation, and analytics. That's what's going to come out of this. And so you're still going to be faced at the culmination of phase 3 of how do you carry on that work. That's not work that a software system just that runs, that doesn't have people's time involved. And so that's why we presented you the alternative of looking more longitudinally at this and looking at it from a more I hate to sort of say an outsourcing model, but more of a partnership model of saying, this kind of expertise we're going to need for the foreseeable future.
Is it fair to say that that kind of partnership helps to keep that strategic plan a living, breathing document that you're kind of forcing us to constantly revisit and refine and keep alive?
Yes, but it's also, it's much more around the information infrastructure. The ongoing engagement is really around information infrastructure, is really what it's about, is how do you continually collect, manage, analyze, and report the variety of data elements you're going to need. I mean, just think about this. You're going to have something in your plan that deals with benchmarks, and so who's going to do all that? You're going to have something that has to do with setting individual growth expectations. You're going to have something to do with evaluating programs. You're going to have something to do with evaluating stakeholders. You're going to have, for every single tactic you put into play, there's a data implication.
Okay, but that gets to my question. So isn't that set as part of phase 3? You set your benchmark. Now we have the benchmark. What are we doing then in year 2, in year 3? Are we evaluating whether that's still the right benchmark? Do we really need to do that each year? If you can give maybe a specific example, I think that'd be helpful for me.
But you have to update. So you might have you might have tactics that deal with certain things like this. We're gonna monitor the individual student growth of every kid and make projections against benchmarks. And so you're going to run these kinds of reports on every single kid because you think it's just a part of the strategic plan. So somebody's got to do this work, and you got to have the technology infrastructure to do this. You got to have the analytic infrastructure because you know what, students keep coming to school and they keep taking tests. So who's building the data warehouse and who's updating the data?
Let me kind of and let me bring it down even a level lower, and I'll give you a couple examples. Even the report that I brought to the last board meeting on the student growth, that probably took a couple days only for a psychologist to run the data, because we don't have someone that runs data in our district. no, we had never had specific reports, so we had to run 10 different reports to figure out what kind of report best would show you student growth. And then from that point, we were ready to go. So even if we set up regular reports, I'm not the one that runs that data. It takes teacher time, administrator time, district office time, and the only full-time district office people are gonna be Kevin and myself. Jane can run some of the things for business. And so when you add all those things together, evaluations, that's where I start panicking. Because in 3 years, actually in 2 years, we need to start having our plan for student growth, or we have to go along with what the state tells us we have to do. So we have all these teachers, every single one of them is gonna have to have a student growth measured, projected, data's gonna need to be kept, and it's gonna need to be inserted into their evaluation. Our job is to go through and have the conversations about the teachers for improvement. Who's gonna run all that data? We don't have a person to do that. And that's just a little piece, you know, the state's now mandated this, family survey. That's gonna add another huge piece that none of us even know about.
So ECRA provides you with a tool to
They do it.
to simplify your life when it comes to all that kind of stuff you
They,
just discussed.
they do,
So
they
you can
do.
run reports at your desktop that allow you to more efficiently manage your day-to-day.
I can not only run the reports on my desktop, I can call John and say, John, I need this by 3:30 this afternoon, because I just thought of this great idea I'm gonna bring to the board, and the report would be to me. Whereas here, I have to find somebody that can, or I can, I mean, I'm a quick read on it, but the question's gonna be, if I'm in a building or I have meetings, you know, not everything is at my fingertips. And so, which is one reason why I'm having 3 staff members in each of the buildings learn how to work through the Rising Star program, which is also state mandated for school improvement. Because if you only have one person in each building, what happens if that person wins the lotto and leaves the state? You know, so now we're diversifying. We've got 3 staff members, but when you have 3 staff members do that, that takes away from their instruction. Where are we gonna get that? Where are they gonna find their time? So we either have to pay them, or we take them from the classroom, and they're here for their teaching, not for their running of data. So it's a very big picture.
See, none of that was really clear to me. none
No.
about the
Well,
rest of
that's
it.
what this is for.
So-
I mean,
I'm glad we're having this conversation,
this
because
is for.
so what I think I now understand, you've repeated it, I want to repeat it again. This is an ongoing engagement, probably forever, and we need to have it as a line item in our budget if we want to measure accountability for all kinds of purposes, whether it's teacher performance or student growth, correct?
Absolutely, and in our experience, I mean, depending, because I want to be clear too that there's no misunderstandings, you know, on the board. If anything, you would expect it to potentially grow if you want to keep using us for more and more things.
And
Now,
it's
that's-
not likely that the state is gonna reduce the amount of requirements that they put on you, on us every year. They're constantly coming up with unfunded things that we have to do that lend itself to this type of data management, right? I mean,
But I want to be clear that there's still some, but this would cover you for all the data warehousing, analytics, and reporting that you need to do on data. But sometimes, new initiatives do spawn, though, that if you wanted us involved, you would, you know, that it's likely that it could grow. I mean, if you went down the road of we want to develop our own social and emotional test, right, we can help with that. That's very, that's our wheelhouse, but that's outside the scope
basically,
of
this
this.
is a data management retaining fee.
Yeah, that's what it is.
It's not only developing the strategic plan, it's in place of a
Right,
staff
okay,
member
that
that
I
does
did
it.
not understand, because I think the strategic plan, I mean, I think there's more value in the data element than your strategic plan. I mean, the
I do too.
strategic plan, we could sort of, you know, work our way through with staff and muddle through, okay? But clearly the data management, because we don't have it in-house, you know, has gotta happen. Now, you know, whether this is, you know, you're saying it's what, 30 grand a year, 35 grand a year?
35.
So is that, I mean, is that a competitive thing? I mean, do other people do this?
A whole lot of people do this.
How are you competitive?
Very competitive.
I
I'm
will
asking, I don't
Yeah.
know, I don't know.
Well, I
No,
mean,
not
here's
really
here's what you're gonna find, and again, I'll speak as you know, as candidly as I can here. You will not find another firm that has the same blend of expertise that we have under the same roof. There's data warehousing companies, okay? So you can go get quotes from data warehousing companies. But all they're gonna do is hand over a warehouse of data, okay? So that's one shops. Then there's the analytic shops. So you can go hire shops that have a bunch of statisticians that'll bang away at your data warehouses, but they're not gonna do both. Right? And then there's the other shops that are gonna do the strategic planning facilitation and the board function workshops and everything like that. But they're different than the other two firms. And then there's the professional development, administrative professional development, leadership training, teacher evaluation shops that do that work. In order to recreate the services that we offer, you're into 4 or 5 different firms. We're the only.
No wonder I'm so tired, because I'm going to all 4 of them.
No, it is. We're the
Is it?
we're the only shop that has that kind of blend of expertise.
I will also share, because I totally agree with you, Chris. I think the data piece is so huge. I actually interviewed several superintendents on different companies to do this. And some of them were really good at the beginning piece, but a lot of it went back on the superintendent and the administration. And I did this all in my own district, in my last district. It was me. And the level of our strategic plan there versus this plan is like a difference between kindergarten and senior in high school. Because there was only one of me, and so we could just do the basics under each of the items. And the staff wasn't real happy with me because I was constantly going to say, okay, I need your data on this, this, and this. And I don't want it taking away from the classroom.
Well, now, Jean, is it
No,
your
I get it.
recommendation that we approve a 3-year contract then? I mean, what would be your
I,
request?
our district is small, and if we did not approve a 3-year and we did a 1-year, I'm gonna be back telling you the next year, either we hire someone full-time, which I'm gonna tell you for 35,000, I'll be looking far, I'll be doing an intergalactical search. Or the other option would be that I'll be coming back saying, let's use them. I know their reputation. I know I know their work in some of the districts, and it's cutting edge.
Now, I heard you ask the question, I'm not sure I caught the answer, but can we go with a 1-year contract and then decide at the end of that year whether we want
Was
to
a
tack
renewal.
on additional years, or is this decide now, or it's less expensive if you sign up now for 3?
We're a very reasonable firm, and we've never, ever in the history of the firm, if a district wanted to cut ties with us, not allow that to happen. We've never done that. That's not who we are. We believe in what we do, and we're very good at what we do, that it rarely happens. Now, that said, and I just want to point this out because it sends a completely different message to the administration. Signing a 1-year contract sends a totally different message than signing a 3 or 5-year contract with the option to get out at any time. It sends a totally different message of commitment to the administration to invest the time and the energy to make this partnership work, because they know the board is committed to it longitudinally, unless things don't go the way we want and we can get out with no penalty, and I'm happy to do that. But there is.
I just want to make, sorry to interrupt, but I'm a French person and we're very rude people.
So that makes it.
Not all of them.
That's our reputation. I uphold the reputation. I deal with data every day, okay? But what I found out is that there's data that are meaningful and data that are useless. So, what I would like to do, what I would feel more comfortable doing is, seeing what you guys can do and say, oh, this is, let's drop this, or let's, as somebody said, let's maybe do this every, 5 years. Do we want to monitor this or that on a regular basis? There's some data that are, your business is probably like my business. There's like 5 or 6 critical metrics, and the rest is like icing on the cake. And so I want to make sure that we're compliant with, state and federal regulation, and that we have the real metrics we need. And I don't want to get completely data-driven to the point where we are swimming in it and we cannot see the bigger picture. Does that make sense?
I would agree 100%. That's not going to happen with us. We're the only data and analytics firm that recommends that districts look at, less data. We really try to keep it very strategically focused.
It doesn't say in here who owns the data. I assume the district retains ownership to the data, correct?
Of the raw data that you provide us, that is the input, you can have that back, obviously, you can have that back anytime, but any and all of the processes, algorithms, technology know-how, all the intellectual property that goes along with the translation of that data and benchmarks and everything we do in technology.
So if at the end of 3 years, we wanted someone else to maintain our dashboard, or we wanted to hire our own person to do it, how would we do that transition? Or at the end of 2 years?
We would give you all the raw data that you gave us back.
I see.
What's the incentive for us to sign up for
That's-
3 years
that's the
versus
comment
1 year?
right there.
Well, 3 years, we
What
get
was your
more.
question again? Can you repeat that? I missed
What
it.
was what's the incentive for us signing up for 3 years versus 1 year? It's like a quantity discount. I would assume something
Well,
comes into play.
I mean, part of it,
If
part
you've
of it is
already
fi-
set it up, and then it's, continuing to monitor what's been set up.
But this kind of work, it's not like that. It's not where you set it up, you set and forget it like the infomercials. It's not. It doesn't really work like that just because of how much. You got to maintain the data warehouse every year. You have to do. You're not just updating it. You have to do data analysis every year. These are repeatable tasks, but they're tasks that take time each and every year.
Sounds like something that's going to snowball too over time. It's going to keep growing, the amount of work that comes out of this kind of.
Sure. I mean, if anything, our experience is these engagements grow. They don't get smaller. Now, they don't have to. I mean, I'm not trying to say that they're going to grow, but if our experience has shown that as districts identify more and more needs, and as they identify the kinds of resources they need, they find by far the cheapest and the highest quality way to get that done is to partner for it.
I want to point out a message that I think that that hasn't come up yet, that I think we need to remember too, is using a firm like this, I think, sends a message to all of our stakeholders, our community members, our staff, which is a stakeholder we gotta keep remembering, is when they know that we're committed to implementing a strategic plan and implementing a program like this that helps them to be cutting edge. Because one of the things we found in our data was how important quality was to our teachers. I think this sends a huge message to our teachers and our staff, our building personnel, to the people in the community who care about education, which is everybody, to the parents, I just think the PR value involved in having something a long-term commitment to something so cutting edge, and compared to the idea of hiring somebody and trying to reinvent the wheel ourselves, we're saving a ton of money. I just think there's nothing but good messaging to come out of it. So it's kind of a different perspective. It's not just dollars and cents and long-term and that kind of thing, but I think it's a message to the community that we're committing to excellence, and this is the tool that can help us get it there on a lot of different levels.
And if it makes you feel better as far as pricing, because of the size of your district, the floor pricing we have is $35,000. We just don't go lower than that because we can't make it worse. You have the absolute lowest pricing that we offer, and that's the truth, because it's just the floor. It's the floor that things don't become viable for us anymore.
So I've looked at this Thornton Township one that you guys did, right? And I've also looked at Lake Forest, and Lake Forest 115 and Lake Forest 67. And they have dashboards as well. And to our knowledge, they have somebody internal who's,
Lake Forest?
yeah.
They did, yeah,
Lake
they do.
Forest. And just the look of it and the interactive nature of it, the one that you guys put together, seems to me far superior, just looking at it. What are we, for $35,000, likely to get something along these lines? What, are they paying a lot more for what they're getting? Are they, I'm just trying to understand sort of
We would,
what
I mean,
we
you're
would
gonna get
expect.
something similar to that. I mean, obviously it's
Thornton.
gonna be yours, so we're gonna, you know, brand
Right,
it.
we wouldn't have these folks here. So the pictures would be different. No.
But you're gonna get that.
But because there's lots of measures, there's three areas of measurement, and within each one there's 6. So looks like 18, 19, maybe 20 metrics that are reflected here on the left. And is that the order of magnitude about the number of metrics that we'd have publicly available, and then we'd have others underneath it? I'm just
Yeah,
trying to
you have-
figure out size and magnitude.
So you have 4 goals, so you probably have 4 general areas that are, you can see as those main headings. And then, then you probably have 3 to 7 indicators under each, definitely no more than that, probably 4 or 5 indicators under each.
And so that would be publicly available, presumably, because that's what I'm looking at Thornton, but privately available, we would have a location that we could go to, or administration could go to get additional data, which would also be hosted by you, or?
Yeah, everything's hosted by us.
And so if we wanted to know this data by not just how the 3rd grade is doing, but how Mrs. Jones's 3rd grade did, that would be.
We handle all that.
You would handle that, also included in the 35?
Also included. The only thing that's not included are when we start to go down roads of acquiring other kinds of data. If you ask us to run annual surveys, that's not in that
Or
cost.
do more
If you
focus
do more
groups or
focus
interview
groups,
students
you
on
know,
their wellness
that's not
or
in that
something, yeah.
cost. You know, develop a test for you, that's not in that cost.
Yeah.
But all of the infrastructure around the data you have is. And any benchmarks that would be relevant to that data is.
John, it's been a while since I looked at the dashboard, and I'm going to give an example. Let's say, because I know that this is something that the old board and the new boards both talked about, in the finance section, if you clicked on the dashboard for our fund balance, would it be possible, if you keep clicking in, we could actually like put in our fund balance policy, so everything could be tied into that one dashboard?
You mean by policy, you mean?
The actual policy, so you can
Like a
click on
document?
it.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
a document.
The verbiage?
So I'm thinking, I click on the fund balance, there's a dashboard on what our fund balance is, there'll be a benchmark, and then maybe there's another place I can click right there, to actually give me the fund balance policy, if we put it there. I'm assuming you can do pretty much
Yeah, I'm
anything
sure,
you want
yeah,
with
yeah,
dashboards.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
anything's possible you know, unless it's like throw the whole thing out, custom build from the ground up. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that we wouldn't be able to accommodate, you know, any reasonable requests that you had.
So I think, because with anything, we really try to give at least a week, if not a lot longer, for reflection and thought and questions. It sounds to me like maybe we might have 2 different options. One of them would be to go in on a 1 year for the 30,000 and then reevaluate based upon what we see, because I heard a lot of feedback on things people are going to be looking for. The other option would be to engage in a 3-year at 35,000 a year, knowing that if, at any time, if the board wasn't happy, that we could work through that with you too.
What's the incremental 5,000 get us?
So
Between the
the
1 year
first-
30 and the 35 that we paid
This
on?
is why I think it's a little bit confusing, because throughout the strategic planning process, the conversations evolved and sort of the needs evolved. The 30,000 is really a very different kind of proposal. It's really apples and oranges, and that's, I think, part of the problem, is the $30,000 is just, we're gonna implement phase 3. And it's really not a data, it's the first phase of data, but it's really not, it has nothing ongoing as far as data needs. What we did was really provide you an incredible cost opportunity by saying, we have this other structure, ECRIS, right, which is this sort of partnership for research and analytics and data warehousing. And so what we offered to you was, if we engage for that over 3 years, right, which usually has nothing to do with strategic plans, it's just a different structure. But if you engage in that, we will do phase 3 as the first priority under that engagement. And so the idea was that for 5,000 more a year, you can have the whole phase 3 and ongoing infrastructure for very, not much incremental cost. But it really is two separate ideas. We're just giving you a real cost opportunity here to sign a different kind of arrangement that really isn't a strategic planning arrangement. It's really a data arrangement that we're just going to fold this work into the first part of that.
The phase 3 without dashboard here is with no dashboard at all is the 15,000.
And that would be just for us to come in and
Facilitate.
and facilitate all the meetings to fill in all of these, fill in all these frameworks.
So it sounds like if we want to have an ongoing relationship and we start at 30, we're going to be behind the 8 ball in the second year, as opposed to if we'd started with the 35, which gets you motivated in an ongoing direction, let's say.
Right, and where I say it's apples and oranges is the 30 just gets you organized for all of the strategic plan. There's no ongoing nature. There's really no data infrastructure associated with that proposal. We just gave you another alternative, but the other alternative.
So it sets
That's
up
not
the
really
system
an option.
for us to,
That's not
To monitor.
But that's not going to give us what we've all talked about requiring in order to measure performance for both students and teachers.
No, you're going to need something ongoing.
Right.
And that's why we
So
said,
the
well, why
30
don't we
You know,
just.
it would be helpful for me to really understand what we're buying for what, I mean, I think I do, but it's not in writing.
Right.
So I'm not questioning the value. I'm questioning, I'm a little uncomfortable because I'm not sure I'm not signing up for something, then I may expecting it, and you're gonna come back and say, oh, Chris, by the way, this was not part of the original package. So I'd like a very detailed, like one said phase 3 was dashboard. What exactly are we talking about? You guys doing all the facilitating of the meetings, with the various strategic goal and objectives, as well as the data?
so you're talking, you just want an itemized list?
Yeah, and I have to have, so I'm buying what I think I'm buying, you know what I'm saying? Right now, I'm a little foggy, and that makes me uncomfortable. I mean, for all I know, I would spend 40 grand if I have a better sense of what it is, but right now, I'm shaky. I mean, am I the
I
only
think-
one in that?
Because you guys don't have the basis, and that's the hard part, because you don't have the context
Is it the
of
data,
other
is it the
board members.
ongoing data thing that's foggy, or the phase 3 of the
No, it's
strategic?
in
I
the-
don't
in the
know what
last-
what
Just
it
an itemized
covers.
list.
Yeah, in the last 15 minutes, we've gone from looking at 30,000, and now I don't understand why we would even consider that, because if we go that course, we don't get the data we need to operate on an ongoing basis. So only, to me, 35 makes a lot more sense.
That's why
I didn't
we
even
presented
underst-
it.
But I
That's why
didn't
we
even understand
presented
that 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, and it's not on this. I mean,
It's not in the document,
I mean,
right.
it would be
They just
useful
don't
to
have the
have like an
context.
Excel spreadsheet, and it'd say, these are the service you provide, and it would be fairly itemized. Data management, setting up of benchmark.
I think that letter of agreement itemizes a lot of the things that
Maybe that's what we're not looking at.
that would be done under.
Scope of services.
Yeah, we got confused because there's another sheet
There's a
here.
lot of, there's a lot
The
of.
confusing part came from, we gave you a different alternative that's a very different alternative, and I don't think we adequately.
See if these guys have them, because I have extras.
Where it is, letter of agreement? The one that says letter of agreement?
Yeah.
on it?
It's the last thing in your blue folder. It's in the back on the right.
See if they, because if they don't, I have extras.
And then we get into, I know, I hate with two lawyers on the board start getting into legal stuff, but the term of the agreement doesn't allow any out for either party according to the way it's currently written, and usually that's a pretty typical clause. So
Does anybody
I don't want
wonder-
to get into that now, but that's something that's not.
Yeah,
real
and
clear.
that's no issue.
Does anybody,
can add that
I wonder if anybody wonders about the old dance floor versus balcony perspective here. I mean, I would tend to think that analyzing the text of the contract and the specific scope of services falls in the dance floor, and as the board, if Gene recommends one plan over the other, or one provider over the other, we would give her some big picture questions, make sure we're covered, and then take her recommendation and vote on it.
That would be something, John and I, and actually, we did that with another Susan would remember whichever one we added that to the other contract we voted on.
And what happens a lot of times, these are just letters of agreement, just to, the main terms we're agreeing to. What normally happens then is we go into a real contracting phase where we write a robust contract, but for the sake of just understanding what you'd have to agree with the major clauses, that's why it's just sort of a letter of agreement that often there's another iteration of a real contract. But, you know, I think,
I need to make sure that there's no jargon in here, though, that, I think when we talk about a data warehouse, and we use a very outdated one here now called Inform, there's a lot of things in data warehouse. Every kind of collection, student achievement that we have for students, and the majority of our students go K-8, so we can actually follow students through the course of their whole educational experience on many different items. So a warehouse, believe it or not, is really does house a lot of data. The intelligence portal, you may want to define for us, because
Yeah.
that would be your, I don't know what that is. The local growth model, which John has kind of talked about, and we're still better defining, is that they're going to help us determine, based upon norms for the nation, not just the state, what would be our growth model? What's appropriate? Just like I shared last week when I did the student growth, and I said, even though MAP said that our kids grew the right amount, we don't want to be the right amount here. We want to surpass growth of what's projected. That's something ECRA would be able to help us with, because they look for districts that have our same demographics. I think when we talk about data updating, we collect so much data, and right now it's everywhere. You know, when they send me this new data from the parent surveys, I'm not sure where we're gonna house that. It's everywhere. We've got a program that needs to house the teacher ratings for everything, because based on a teacher rating, the teachers are all put in different groups. AYP subgroup analysis, we talked a little bit about that last week, but every single group.
What's AYP again?
AYP is annual yearly progress. It's tied into the No Child Left Behind.
You know what would be useful for us that know nothing, is that every time there's a state mandate or federal mandate, then.
That's a good idea,
You
too.
put it next to it. You see what I'm saying? Because it's, you know, we're gonna have to keep the data and we're gonna have to do the reporting, okay?
I'm looking at this right now, and I can tell you that, based on my opinion, all of this, with the exception of the unlimited phone access to ECRA and the dedicated ECRA, all of that, the other things, all tie into mandates, federal and state,
Okay.
that we have to do.
Which take away from your time doing.
Well,
what you
it's my
really-
job,
I
but.
know, but it's the real job of being in the schools and.
and don't discount the teacher evaluation piece
Is huge.
a enormous,
And see,
enormous obligation.
They haven't been presented information on that too, so I think in all fairness, everybody's kind of on different pages with their knowledge, and, you know, I'm just sitting here as you're talking, thinking, this is gonna be, it's unmanageable. I actually think it's gonna be, I think I understand why I'm so
Was the teacher
tired.
evaluation thing gonna get rolled into this?
Absolutely. In fact,
Where
John
is-
could help us with what I struggled with this year, tying principals to data, because that was mandated this year. And I'm gonna tell you that that was very difficult to do.
And just to give you know an idea too, is national organizations like AASA, the American Association of School Administrators, sort of the predominant organization for superintendents and top school leadership. It's such a big national issue that they went and did due diligence on every firm across the nation that provides these kinds of services, because they wanted an exclusive relationship with one firm to recommend to their members. They chose us. And I could go on and on about, and I know that that's not the issue here, but at some point you just have to take a step back and look at the the total scope, whether it's strategic planning related, whether it's federal mandate related, the total scope of data it needs that the district has, and ask yourself, is $35,000 a reasonable amount of money to pay to satisfy all of that? I think we are not the kind of firm, because it's not who we are, to itemize, we're gonna do this. It's not in the spirit of a partnership. You have to look at this as staff augmentation. You have to look at this as, we're gonna extend the capacities of the firm through a relationship with ECRA, and we're gonna work in a partnership and more fluid way to satisfy all of these needs. Now, would we write an engagement to do this, and this, and then provide you a price? Sure, but you are not gonna get the benefits of ECRA that way. It's just, you're not gonna have that ongoing expertise available to you whenever you need it.
And that's gonna be a difference for a lot of our board members coming from the business world, because we bid out certain things, and then our professional agreements, like our architect or our attorneys or data management and strategic planning, those are all professional agreements, and so we don't bid those out because they're all different in many ways, and it's how they meet the individual student or school district needs. And so that's different for people from the business world, because I don't know if there even is anything such as that. We didn't go out to bid for strategic planning services. Instead, we looked into the strategic planning companies that were in use in the area. And then I went and talked to superintendents and looked at their websites and, did my own investigation and had board members look at their websites also.
No, I understand, that's basic buying a service,
So.
so I have no problem.
But again, I do understand where you're all coming from, because the basis, you guys don't have the context and the basis for all of this. And I do need to get, our teacher evaluation committee is presenting to all of you in August. And you will be it's actually, I'm excited about it. The teachers are excited about it right now, but there's also a huge degree of fear. And I'll be presenting to parents on it next year also. Huge.
So where are we now?
Huge.
What's the next step with regard to?
Well, we're gonna need to vote on it next week, unless we wanted to hold off till July, but
No, I
we're
think-
already,
I think we should vote on it next week.
I will always try to bring at least one meeting for discussion, so you can ask questions in between for a week.
Are there other questions people have that need John to answer?
I just want to be clear on what exactly we will be voting on. We'll be voting whether to retain ECRA under this letter agreement, under
Yes.
a different version of a letter agreement, because I would just point out that I appreciate your representations about being able to get out of the relationship before the end of the 3 years, and I would just ask that that be reflected in whatever we vote on.
And I would just reiterate that these letters of agreement are just meant to say, here are the main terms we're going to have to agree to. It normally happens that once you agree to that, then we go through like a real contract.
We'll have a contract after that, but I'll make sure that that's represented in there.
The only other question I have about this, appreciating that we are not gonna itemize word for word what all is done, but the reference that I see to teacher evaluation
Yeah,
comes
with
in
the
a little
linking.
bit of an oblique reference. It says
Linking student
linking student
achievement, right.
achievement to teacher and administrator evaluations.
I would
And
separate it.
so where is it, or how do we represent that I think that what we've been saying, the whole teacher evaluation thing, whatever that is covered here? Is it, I understand linking the achievement to teacher evaluations, but where's the data input or the data storehouse for the administration and teacher evaluations themselves?
Yeah, is that part of the deal?
Well, there's components that we're in a position to help with, and then there's components, I mean, we're not going to go in and observe
We
the
have
class,
the
you know.
evaluation
No.
tool.
I know we have the evaluation tool, but we have presumably the statistics that will feed,
Into your model.
that will.
They're
If
gonna
you want us to
model.
house that, we will. A lot of districts, that's going to be a decision that you make, whether you want us to take those other practice components or not. You may have
Right.
systems that work perfectly well for that.
I'm gonna tell you, I'll be asking
Doesn't-
for your services
One
on
of,
that.
one of the points in para, wasn't that the teachers work with administration to develop
Yes.
the way they tie student achievement to their own performance?
And,
So then
and
we have to feed that to, once that's decided on, feed that to John's organization.
But John will also help us determine, for instance, I'm gonna give you, what I worked on with our middle school principal. They didn't make AYP, so we had his goals be in the reading and math area in the subgroup that did not make AYP, and that's what I used. That could be very easy instead of me going back and having Nate run all that information at the crazy time of the year that I did his evaluation, because I think I got his done 2 days before the deadline was due. Then I could call John and say, can you print that data up? I have my evaluation meeting February 20th.
So just to give a concrete example, if we wanted to know, I don't know, something simple, like, what's the average rating for our sixth grade teachers, and what's the average rating for our fifth grade teachers? I don't, would that data be something, was that a report we could decide, I'm not sure we would decide to have that on here, but would that be something that's covered here in the scope of services?
Yeah, sure, especially if you have us, I gotta be honest with you, a lot of districts though choose not to have their personnel like their formal personnel records housed with us. That's a different decision.
And that I can't see happening, but I will share with you on the new school report card in the next, I believe it's gonna happen in the next year. All of us will reporting how many excellence and how many proficient, needs improvement, and unsatisfactory teachers, and that will be posted on all of our websites. So that will be public data.
I mean, the main piece you're getting out of us is the growth component.
Right.
That's, how you tie that achievement growth piece to the teacher evaluation. That's the hard part. The other part,
That's what we need help
educators are
with.
very comfortable doing. They've been doing it forever.
Okay.
It's really that growth component that's the new piece that presents a whole lot of complexities.
And see, ECRA has the background where I thought I did a pretty good job with the middle school principal in setting his goals, but I don't want to just collect the data. What I want to do is collect the data so that we're looking at what we're doing and improving. That's the whole model behind teacher evaluation is, okay, here are all these things going on in your classroom. What can you do? We're not just working on making you a better teacher. What's going to improve the learning going on in your classroom? Doesn't matter how you teach unless the kids are learning.
I think that's gonna be an
So-
ongoing process
It
too, because
already is.
it's not something that's set in stone, and perhaps by having tools like John brings to the table might give people ideas to evaluate different ways that we haven't even considered.
And the other thing, just to keep in mind is because of the complexities of all this teacher evaluation piece, it's that conversation with the teachers and the administration of how you're doing this is, we have a lot of experience with that. I mean, we've helped, we're in a new age of education. When you're sitting down, I mean, you're a little bit different here than some other districts, but, districts that have these, big, strong unions, and you're sitting down, and we're sitting between the administration and the teachers using collectively bargaining algorithms that are going to be used to tie their growth components to evaluation, and the AFT is sitting there with a statistician, and
This is where we're going.
this is where I personally have been at bargaining tables where we're collectively bargaining algorithms. It's I'm going to reserve judgment. We all have our judgments, but it's just where we are.
John, I think it would be my wish, and I think I'm representing all of you, so tell me if I'm wrong. After the vote, we need to have a July meeting as early as possible to talk about the Phase 2 and how that ties into Phase 3 and talking about the language, because that's something that we haven't had as a board. So, and you had said that would be our first step in Phase 3, so.
My recommendation is, if the board's at a position that you're going to move forward with ECHO, whether it's just for 30,000 1 year or whether it's 35 for 3 years, I know you're not voting on it tonight, but if there's a good faith effort to move forward, we can put stuff into motion. We can go back, we can start managing, we can start working with you, getting dates on the calendar, we can get moving. And then when the formality happens next month, it's a formality, but we're happy to start moving in good faith so that we don't lose another month.
I guess my only concern, though, would be is I want to hear from them to help me and help you determine priorities.
Well, we would build that, that's gonna be the first part of phase 3. We're gonna
Right.
build that in, the first.
Right.
But instead of having another meeting to talk about planning how we're gonna do the, let's just get.
No, let's just
put
do
the-
it.
Let's get the dates on the
I
calendar.
think
and
that's
let's-
what everybody wants.
Do we need to wait till July?
Well, there's no dates left in June, Mr. Berry.
I have dates.
You're gonna feel by yourself.
Does it seem like there's consensus about what we're gonna do, or if there's not consensus, it would be good to know that, because,
No, I don't think we have any question we need to move forward with ECRA. That's my opinion. I mean, I don't know if anyone else disagrees. I'm just trying to clarify issues, and I think that's the entire discussion. I have confidence in what you've presented, but that doesn't mean we're not going to continue to ask a lot of
Of course,
questions.
I would
That's
only
your job.
expect that.
Right. But I don't have any problems
I've
with
got a
continuing.
couple of questions, and they're pretty simplistic. How long has ECRA been around?
30 years.
30 years. How many employees do you have?
We have 120 associates nationally. We have an office in Jersey City. We have an office in Rosemont. We have, we're opening an office on the West Coast in San Jose. Now, some of those are contractors, but they're people that are working exclusively for us.
And how many districts do you work with?
Over the course of the, of the firm who we have worked with, we've worked with more than 1,000 school districts nationally.
How many are you working with currently?
Currently active at any one time is probably a few hundred. Like alive, active at any one time, because a lot of them are project-based and they go, and they go away. But just to give you an idea of the different pieces that we do, we are the parent company of the largest executive search firm for education. We place,
You can state who that is, because actually, that was the search firm that brought me here.
right. So Hazard Young Attia and Associates, we're the parent firm.
Who's that?
Hazard Young Attia and Associates, we're the parent company. So they're actually a division of ECRA.
But that's not part of the 120 that you have doing that.
It's part of it's
So-
part of the total infrastructure of ECRA, yeah.
Some of it overlaps, some of them do both.
We're moving towards a much more systemic model that links leadership with strategic planning and data, and that's really what we're trying to move towards.
So just to summarize, when we get together in July, we're going to be full-blown ready to start moving forward with this beginning of Phase 3, addressing some of the issues or questions we may have about the existing mission statements and et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely, we're ready to go.
Okay.
So,
Our big concern is finding a date that all of us are gonna be in town. So I'm gonna start on it tomorrow.
Okay.
Good luck.
Anybody else have any questions or concerns that John hasn't addressed?
No.
So I think, Leanne, in answer to your question, we'll make the proposal engaging in a relationship with ECRA for the 3 years,
okay.
if that's,
Makes sense.
My pleasure. Obviously, if you have any questions, just, what time is it?
that's very important. If you have questions, because sometimes tomorrow or the next day or tonight when you go home, you may have questions, shoot an email my way or call me, or I can put you directly in contact with John.
And if you're wondering, you can go on our website, ecgroup.com, if you're just wondering about some background and that sort of thing. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Julie, are you comfortable with where the outcome of this, like to wrap a second look at Phase 2 into the beginning of Phase 3?
Well, you know my feelings. I've looked very carefully at the strategic plan as it exists and the mission, vision, goals. I think they can be improved upon. But I want to move things along. I would respectfully suggest that, that I prepared something, that be distributed tonight, and then we can come in, I think, further along to have that conversation in July. I mean, it may be everybody looks at it and says, this is terrible, we love what we had before, we're not going to consider changing it, in which case we can get going on the timelines and everything else in
Thank you, John.
stage 3.
Thank you, John.
Very much.
I would appreciate seeing that.
Right. It can't hurt. I mean, I've come up with some proposals. Maybe you like them, maybe you don't. Maybe it makes you think, well, gee, we should consider yet another approach. It would, I think, advance the discussion to have these talking
But as
points.
long as we fold it into what John's proposed, are you comfortable with that kind of progression?
I don't see what difference it makes, other than the fact that, you have voted, I know, on what's here, and I presume that if we wanted to change it or take it in a different direction, we'd have an opportunity at that meeting to I don't know, it's
Somewhere
procedure
we'd
to
have-
vote again,
We can only
or,
vote when we have it planned in advance, but we can discuss it and then decide to vote subsequently, but.
Because we have to post, if we're gonna vote on something,
Yeah.
like if we were gonna vote to change language in it,
It's an agenda.
we would need to know it ahead of time so it's posted.
You can
well, I
change it
get
in
that,
a
but you,
minute.
why can we put it on as a vote and then decide not to vote? That way, if we want to move forward, again, I don't know what exactly the vote is. If we're voting on new language, maybe we'll be prepared to do that, maybe we won't. Maybe we'll decide we don't need to, so put it on the agenda and we'll use the right or not use the right.
Hey,
as
can
the
I make a
discussion
suggestion?
unfolds.
What if we each, I've seen what you've done. What if we each took a look at it and sent you our comments so that you can consolidate it into one
Well,
file?
send Jean.
Or
Yeah.
send Jean your comments,
No, you can't do that.
Yeah, no, I think that would violate.
That creates like a wagon wheel communication, which is,
Well, you need to talk about it anyway.
yeah.
Do it all
So,
in
and I
open
think
session.
John is going to offer the venue for that, and then at that meeting, you can decide where you're gonna go with it.
We can distribute the comments that Judy made.
Yeah.
And we can come prepared to that next meeting, ready to rock and roll.
Yeah,
Right, and I would put it on as a vote item because you can do that, right? And then just decide
well.
to table the vote or
We're
not take a
probably
vote.
gonna, we will probably have the meeting with them as a committee of the whole meeting. And usually what we do,
You don't-
I've really tried with this, is all committee of the whole things, anything we bring for a vote, we try to discuss unless it's a very easy thing. So we would discuss it at the committee of the whole, and then the next meeting, we would vote on it.
Right.
So we can get consensus around it.
Yeah,
at the
as long
next
as you
meeting
get a
and then
consensus, you don't need
formalize
to vote
it-
necessarily.
formalize it
You'll
at the
do the
next
vote as a
meeting.
formality.
That's,
I want to say something about the process, though, because I feel, the way I feel about it is, the document we came up with was a group production, right? Because they came in and facilitated a thing where we had certain information and data about words that were important or values that were important. I think anybody who was on the board at that time probably would have taken what we have right now and rewritten at least parts of it.
If we were on our
I know
own.
I would have.
Sure.
There were things I thought were awkward or that I didn't like, but that was what could be agreed to by a group of 7 people and the superintendent. So if we go back, there, and I, I haven't seen what you're proposing, I'm sure there's probably some benefit to it, but ultimately, then we're stepping back to the place of 7 people again, looking at a document and trying to rewrite it. I don't think that we could just say, okay, well, we have these changes, are we gonna implement this or not? Do you know what I'm saying? It's gonna devolve into, okay, the 7 of us have to agree on all the wording again, and it just seems like, I wouldn't wanna keep you from having, substantial input on things that you feel are important, but I also feel like, holy cow, is this gonna change the outcome? Because I don't want us to slow down.
Can we at least have the conversation and make that decision when we get to it?
I mean, I guess so, John, you've got the benefit and advantage of having seen what changes are being proposed. I haven't seen them, so I
Well,
don't,
why don't we do that? There's nothing to be lost by doing that.
That's fine, I'm just here saying
I
that
think
it was
that to
7
the
people
extent
coming
that-
to an agreement after, hundreds of surveys and lots of interviews and lots of group stuff, and so it wasn't, like, that document's not my opinion or not Mark's or Susan's, it's distilled from what we got from the community. So if you wanna talk about it, fine, I'm just saying, I think the document needs to reflect what the community communicated to us.
I agree with that. I hearken back to, I don't sometimes think the best work product comes out of a committee sitting around
for
all at
sure.
once. So
For sure.
if there's another process that we can use at this point to come up with what we think is a better work product, absolutely, it's got to reflect what the community wants, and it has to be something we all agree on. And maybe this is all just a rabbit hole that, we're diving into, and we'll get out as soon as we can in July if we say this isn't working. But, I feel like having looked at it and considered it, I'd like to at least propose some revisions for whatever it's worth. So, and I'm happy to circulate what I've done. I offered
Well,
to do that.
why don't we share all that? Is it this whole pile? Is that going?
we have copies?
That was
I've
from my
got
briefcase.
copies.
Is this all the same thing?
Yeah, they're all the same thing, they're copies.
So, have you got them too?
Yep.
Oh, we got them. Let's not get into this tonight and
Have
come
you guys
fully
got 'em?
prepared
Okay.
to look for substantive change. Right?
Look for any change.
I think you guys, I think,
We don't want to, I would caution us against losing sight of the forest for the trees, you know, there are some big picture ideas in that mission, vision, and goals that are pretty solid. And if we stray too far from that, that's gonna go down that rabbit hole really fast. I worry about getting too focused on details, but we can have that conversation when we're prepared. But
I think the other part that stood out to me was when John was talking, some of the things in here I think are going to help further clarify objectives, which you guys need to be, doing that work anyway. Because the objectives were just general ideas based upon the feedback, but that was something the old board said that they would be turning over to you anyway, so.
So are we in agreement as what our next step is here?
So can I just distill it? We're gonna meet sometime in July, we're gonna have the conversation about phase 2, and we're gonna start talking about the objectives portion of phase 3, is that what the July
He's
meeting will
gonna
be?
come in and to start talking, he's gonna do both. He's gonna be talking about phase 3 to start timelines and dates, and he's gonna go back and revisit phase 2 as it in entirety and as it relates to phase 3 in both areas.
Okay.
Because phase 2 helps define phase 3 too, so we can't really do a whole lot in phase 3 until we go back and talk about phase 2.
And I thought Chris made a good point earlier, that when we start talking objectives, that may focus some good ideas on some subtle wording changes in the goals, so.
Right, and that's why I'm wondering, are
A
we
little
gonna
bit of
talk
an
about,
iterative kind of
Yeah,
process, perhaps.
that's in,
will we be talking about objectives in the next meeting? then?
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good, because I,
And John, either John or, I would imagine Gina will be back for that. And Gina can facilitate that conversation, so, just be prepared that Liz will be calling all of you, because I'm finding that's the easiest way to find out vacation. I've got your vacation schedules if they haven't changed. Is anybody's July vacation schedules not changed?
I don't know.
Then I can put, then Susan, how about if I put the calendar together and then we'll call you?
Oh, I got to do that.
Because the rest of you have been, I mean, you've all shared your vacation schedules already.
I think I did, but I can't be
I've gotta
pinned
go
I
down.
did, but I'd like to review mine.
Exactly.
I don't know, Richard.
Thank you.
I object.
Turns out we'll all be traveling far more than we originally anticipated.
Yes, right.
Any other?
So I'm sorry, I need clarification again on when we get resolution of the phase 2. We don't get resolution till a phase, we don't even regroup to discuss phase 2 again until July? We're not gonna discuss
Right.
it next week?
No,
Not
next
At
week's,
the 18th?
Next
The-
week, the next meeting is bonds.
We're engaging then.
next week is bonds and June
Bonds solely.
18th
Bonds and finance.
is just kind of a review. June 18th, we vote on this. Now, I know I can't get either one of them for the June 18th meeting.
Well, okay. I just would like to, I think any discussion, how many 4 and 5 hour meetings did we have on
Oh my
these the first
gosh,
time?
quite a few.
I think, I'd just like to put this to bed as soon as we can and move
I can,
on. but-
I know Gina cannot make the 18th, but let me see.
What do we need Gina
Facility.
for?
Keep it from going off the rails.
Okay, all right.
Plus, I think it's good for you to read and
It's
review.
interesting, because, I mean, I thought our presentation, was it last week? It was like, eh, you know what I'm saying? Eh. So, what is interesting to me is, I mean, could we actually move it faster amongst ourselves? And then bring them in when we need to bring them in? I mean, I'm just throwing this out there.
I would be concerned about that. I think we'll hit sticking points that were,
Well, but you see, I think there's some value in dealing with, I mean, I think we're rational human being, and it may move things faster. I mean,
Is everyone going to be here June 18th?
Yes.
yeah.
Did you watch any of the meetings where they were facilitating the original document?
Yeah, I did.
You did? Did you see any of them, Chris? The reason I'm asking, because when I am saying go off the rails, one of the things that can happen and this is a different group, so maybe it wouldn't, but one of the things that can happen is you start doing this language, and you might be, kind of wandering from a goal down into objectives that, it sounds good when you're saying it, but it actually is something you gotta leave to the administrators to do, because we're not
I think
educated.
the language thing is interesting to me. I think that we have to agree on principle, and then probably do like a subcommittee that will, to Julie's point, flesh things out a little bit more. Because I'm not a wordsmither, you see what I'm saying? And to your point, I mean, we need to move this around. I mean, we cannot get down with wording. I mean, so that could be done by two people that, work on it with Jean and then decide to, present it from final approval to the board, and that's gonna be the way it's gonna be. You see what I'm saying?
All along been trying to keep this up front so everybody in the community could watch it, participate in it. If you noticed, every
But
time we had a
there's one
meeting, we
thing in
had
agreeing
comments that
on
were
principle.
submitted, and then we talked about them and tried to incorporate
But there's
that.
one thing in agreeing on principle, and there's one thing in wording the principle. And I think that the thing that really matters a great deal is the principle, and so everybody is comfortable with it. The way it's worded is probably not that critical, but it also matters to some people. So you put it to a vote too. I mean, it comes back to a vote.
I'd be curious to know what ACRA says about this. They've worked with hundreds of school districts doing this process, and I think,
I think the
they're
wording-
good at pushing it forward.
I would agree. I also think that the wording matters. The specific wording matters to many people in our community, very specifically. We had people who attended some of our previous meetings who gave us suggestions on wording that we adopted almost verbatim. And to take that offline and to do that in a committee takes some of those people out of the loop who would be interested in being involved or seeing the process, and so.
Let me offer this, because what I hear all of you saying is, let's talk about this, there's a need. I may be able to get, for the 4 new ones, it won't mean, it doesn't have a context, but our very first strategic planning meeting, there was a former superintendent, and his name is Steve Humphreys here. I don't know if you guys remember him. I think all we need is a facilitator. I hear the need to talk this through. Are you open to me calling, it's not gonna be Gina or John that you guys know, but at least then we could talk about it, and we don't have a whole lot on that agenda, the June 18th one.
Bill Melsheimer, somebody who's seen this process through a number of times to help us from kind of going
Maybe
off
Bill
on a
and Steve
tangent
could
where we
come.
don't, I'm all for everybody's input, but I don't want to see us get waylaid. I mean, this has taken several months. We want to get some action.
And I think that, we have consensus on that.
Yeah.
We want to see some action, we want to talk about it. So let me see and all of us are going to be here. And I think that I have some concerns about finding a date in July, I'm going to be very frank. So
Yeah.
let me see if I can get Bill Melsheimer, that's a great one, and maybe Steve Humphreys to come and facilitate that meeting. Because we're very light, we have a couple things to vote on that are important that you'll be hearing
June 18th.
on June 18th, but there'll be time to discuss. That's a good use of your time.
And next week is bond week.
Bonds, finance, budget.
And it's, COW, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And you also
I
have
just wonder
closed
if
session
we-
next week.
But I just wonder, can we have I don't,
Next week, it's not gonna fit.
okay. But
Absolute-
I know we can't wagon wheel. I just wonder if we could bring comments regarding these revisions to that meeting without derailing it, and then have the substantive, let's get to
Yeah.
the final agreement on the 18th with Bill, when Bill's here. I don't want to do anything off, outside the public eye. I agree with Leanne. I think that too many people were too involved in this, and it was too painful the first time. But I do have an interest in moving this forward and not waiting until the 18th to discuss this again. And so I wonder if we in the next week, can talk about this and put on the agenda on the COW, giving our comments. and without making a final decision.
How do we do that
We
while
don't-
containing it?
Do we still have time to
You're
post
right.
that?
Because
I mean,
the bond discussion is gonna go
Okay,
like crazy.
No,
Here, you know,
we don't
You're right.
have, we don't have time to post a change to the meeting next week anyway.
oh, we don't, because this is Thursday, I was thinking it was Tuesday,
So.
okay.
But I think the other piece is, next week, trust me, you're all gonna be leaving with headaches.
We're gonna be spent
It's,
after
it
next
is
week.
gonna be deep.
Okay, so let's not go into this next week, okay.
Pardon me?
Except me. I love that stuff.
Well, most
gonna
of us
be
will be leaving with headaches.
I'm already getting excited.
But, I think,
We're glad you are. We're glad you're here to do that. Thank you.
I
And
think
share
that,
your enthusiasm.
you know, I don't mind. I think all of you should go back and read through and make comments, but I think you need to bring them and talk them through.
prepared.
Okay,
Because
on the 18th. Okay.
all of you have very valid points, and you need to hear from each other, and I need to hear where your priorities are. You know, that was one thing with the other board when we did this, when we started talking objectives, I knew where everybody's priority was. And I was always reassured that when I bring it back to the board for action plans, that if we didn't hit it, we would hit it because a board member would say, "Pick, Leanne, you gave an example, something, I can't remember, but I remember you giving a great example for it." So I really think you're all gonna benefit from the discussion of this, and I think it's better that you read through, you think about it. We get the facilitator and have the discussion. It's a great night to do it, and you're all here.
Can you help us when we put the board packet together for that 18th meeting?
I could put all your comments in the board packet.
You put a fresh copy of the objectives in there and just remind everybody that they need to review all this and come prepared to edit, to prioritize, to talk about all this stuff.
June 18th.
It may be as simple as, you know what, we don't want to have any more conversation about it.
Maybe.
It could be as
But
simple
we
as
won't know that till we
Right.
get into it.
One final, I swear this is the final question. There's parentheses here, variation on Nebo, Utah, variation on Tupelo, Mississippi.
Yeah, you know,
These are
That's the
I
source
Googled,
documents.
you know, for
Okay.
all the hours you spent, I Googled, and you can find a lot of good stuff online.
Yeah, that's interesting, you know.
And I just, you know, some of it made some revisions to reflect what was in the existing
Okay.
strategic plan.
Thank you.
Sure, why
No idea what you're
build a
talking
bill from scratch?
Yeah, exactly.
The citations are there.
Oh, I thought you were
Okay,
talking about something.
have we petered out here? Okay. Does anybody have any issues they want to raise in front of the board for the remainder of the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, I would like to have a motion to adjourn at
First.
8:29.
8:30.
All in favor?
30.
I could have written.
First and seconded by John. We are
Who
adjourned.
was first?
Christine,
Okay, thank you.
thank you, everybody. And good night.
I know.
Oh, did you want 8:29 in the minutes?
Feels a lot like a much ado list. But what are you gonna do?
Thank you, everyone, and I will be bringing bottled water in the future to meetings. I don't share my aspirin. I use every single one of them.
All right.
Motrin.